Hi, we're here at the Detroit Fan Fair, and we're sitting here with industry legend Larry Hama. How are you doing today, Larry?
Pretty good, thank you. Legend.
I personally, yes, I think so.
I'm not dead yet. At least I don't think so. I'm still ticking. Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To be honest, I've waited my whole life to interview you because I grew up on G.I. Joe, right from the very beginning. Pretty much right to the end, right to 155. And I've probably reread your comics more than any other creator's comics. And I just wonder if when you were doing G.I. Joe in the 80s that you thought that the work that you did would impact people so much that 2 decades later they'd still be remembering it this way.
Oh no, because you have to realize that in the comic book industry, a toy licensed book is really like the bottom of the barrel. Nobody ever expected it to last, more than 1 or 2 seasons, and it's very difficult to get any, A-list people to work on them because the rates are actually lower.
Really? Okay.
And I had been trying to get writing work from Marvel, and I was a full editor at Marvel.
Sure.
I couldn't get writing work because the editor said, well, you're an artist, you don't write. Sure. And basically I was the last person they asked. They went through the entire list
Really?
first before they got to me, and I said sure. If it was Barbie, I'd do it.
Okay.
So that's how I got on the book. It wasn't like I was particularly dying to do a military comic. I'd got into the business wanting to do ducks.
Like Carl Barks, Donald Duck type stuff?
I was a big Carl Barks fan.
Okay.
But in the early 70s, there was nobody was doing funny animals anymore.
Okay.
So it was, do what was there or not work.
Now, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, you are a Vietnam veteran?
Yeah.
So you actually brought experience to the comic that probably no one else could have at the time. Is that true?
No, there were plenty of guys around, but
Okay.
by 1982, everything had changed.
Sure.
The uniforms were different.
Okay.
SOPs had changed, and I really had to do a lot of research.
Okay.
What I did bring to it that I knew firsthand was the attitude of the soldiers.
Sure.
And how they relate to each other, and what's important to them, and that's what I was trying to get across. The sense of camaraderie.
Yes.
And the sense of honor, and a moral sense. Not jingoism or blind patriotism per se, and not the attitude of the officer class.
Sure. Yeah.
It's I was trying to do it from the point of view of the common grunt, and I think that comes across.
I think there's specific examples I can think of. If you remember the story where I believe it was Stalker, Snowjob, and Quick Kick were arrested and put in that gulag. Eventually, it was Snake Eyes and Scarlet that came to rescue them. And I remember when they finally, reunited, Stalker actually said to Snake Eyes, "I knew you would come for me." And as a kid, that really hit me because, like you said, the camaraderie that comes from the experience of being a soldier, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, there are things that you take for granted, and there's a sense of that you don't find in the civilian world.
Yes.
It's hard to think of Wall Street brokers or bankers behaving that way.
Sure.
and they sure don't.
No, and we see that now, right? What the results of that?
Well, the other thing, one of the first things that the military instills in you is the whole thing about the chain of command running both ways. That if you're a corporal, or an E4 or E3, you're responsible for everybody that reports to you, you know,
Okay.
and you don't eat until they eat, you don't sleep until they sleep, you know, and that's stamped into you, you know, day in and day out, and that's something they sure as hell don't teach at Harvard Business School in the MBA program, you know. It's something that's fallen by the wayside in American culture, you know, like, you know, personal interest and greed is trumped all this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So.
Now, how about this? With the overall storyline of G.I. Joe, how much of it did you have mapped out when you started? I know that you said that you like to sort of just surprise yourself when you get to the end of every issue, but when you were, for example, doing the origin of Snake Eyes, the backstory between Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes and Zartan and the Ninja Clan, how much of that was mapped out, or did you just make it up as you went along?
I just made everything up as I went along. I had no idea what was going to happen for the entire run. I would basically get them into a fix at the beginning of the story, and then hopefully I would be able to figure out how to get them out of it by the end. You know, I don't really know how to write any. Well, I never consider myself a writer. You know,
Okay.
I started out drawing, and I'm sort of like, you know, a penciler with a word processor, basically. I try to see the entire story as a series of images, and then I just describe them with the words so that the artist can draw it. And the dialogue is the last thing that I do, and I don't do captions. You know, if it's not in the visual, I have them redo it until it's in the visual.
It's funny too, because for a comic that was sort of dismissed as, well, it's just a toy tie-in, it's just for kids, you were ahead of your time in not using captions, not using thought balloons, and also you were, as far as I know, the first creator to do an all-silent issue, right, with silent interlude. That's true.
Well, not really. I mean, one of the inspirations for it was a Wally Wood story in EC Comics called SFX. There's no dialogue and no captions, but it was all like, you know, onomatopoeics, you know.
Okay, yep.
You know, kaslam, chuck, 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 you know. But I wanted to do one that didn't have even sound effects in it, you know, and that was a challenge. I got a lot of flack originally for, you know, not having captions because, you know, Marvel Comics at that period was very caption heavy and very heavy on thought balloons.
Sure.
You know, I was really bucking the system, but now that's the norm, and you know, doing it the other way is considered, you know, old school.
Sure.
Even though, like, I'm now considered old school.
Yeah.
But you know, that really can't be helped. That's the nature of life. You know?
Well, and you know, another innovation I would say, maybe not, like sort of the way that you introduced the backstory with Stalker and Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, I think is really what led to a lot of the later stories that came with like X-Men, where I don't know if you followed X-Men later, but where they would introduce like Team X, and this is where Wolverine actually met Sabretooth, and you know, they did it with Wildcats, they do it with all these, and to me, I think it really started with G.I. Joe, with introducing that more realistic element, even though there was a little bit of fantasy in G.I. Joe. I think it really comes from your run.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's a double-edged sword of like injecting that realism, but when you start to get into these complicated continuities,
sure,
you know, I think that's where the comic book industry cut its own throat. You know, that I consciously tried to make the stories in G.I. Joe and the entire run be all-inclusive entry points that you could, you know, pick up number 65 and jump into it. You know,
sure,
there would be overlapping storylines, and there would be one storyline beginning.
Sure,
you know, so. And there was so many, a lot of the X books were so complicated in their backstory that, you know, if you pick up, you know, an issue in the mid of an arc, you're completely lost.
Sure.
I mean, and you know, that encouraged collection to some degree, but it also it filtered out a lot of potential readers.
Yeah, and I agree, and you know, and that's why I say that, you know, despite the popularity in those days of X-Men, Teen Titans, I still preferred your stuff. And like I said, I can read it and reread it over and over again. Now, what would you say, if you could, for your legacy for G.I. Joe, or for your career, is there anything that you'd like people to walk away thinking when they read your comics as like an underlying maybe theme and that sort of unifies all your work? Is it camaraderie?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's camaraderie, and you know, I like old-fashioned heroes that were, you know, that had, you know, a moral center to them. You know, I like to see, you know, stuff made right. You know, 'cause a lot of the anti-hero stuff that was very popular in you know, in the 80s didn't really appeal to me. You know, and personally, you know, like a lot of, you know, conventional superheroes, you know, had, to me, seemed very much like vigilantes, you know, and like and it rubbed me the wrong way. It's just very hard for me to get a grasp on that type of thinking, or to rationalize it in my head, you know, because to make that right, you have to really have almost a fascist point of view, you know, and I think that's kind of scary. You know, that, you know, you decide that you know, these people are right and these people are wrong, you know, and you're going to set out with, you know, your powers or whatever to make it right. You know, that's not what we're about here in this, you know, in the United States. Well, Canada too. You know, I mean, that's what you know, the constitutions and the concept of a democracy is about. You know.
And you know, I think it's safe to say the readers of G.I. Joe, I speak for myself only maybe, but I think we walk away with a little bit of sense of that, of just thinking about those things. So I think you succeeded.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot for so many years of great stories.
Thank you.